No one was willing to feed the paralyzed Korean Mafia boss until the maid's daughter walked in. Welcome to a story that challenges everything you know about power, fear, and the strength found in a single act of mercy. Before we dive into the lion's den, hit that like button and subscribe. It helps us bring more of these incredible stories to life. And tell me, if you were in a position of ultimate power but lost everything physically, who is the one person you'd trust to see you at your weakest? Let me know in the comments. The estate of Fang Suyong didn't feel like a home. It felt like a tomb made of Italian marble. Outside, armed men with cold eyes stood guard. Inside, the silence was so heavy you could hear the frost forming on the windows. Suyong sat in his custom wheelchair, his jaw tight, his black suit perfectly tailored as if he were still heading to a board meeting or a hit. In the underworld, he was the Dragon of Soul, a man who ruled through terror. But now he was a man who couldn't even lift a spoon. Every professional nurse had quit. Some lasted an hour. The longest lasted a day. They couldn't handle the vitriol, the pride, or the way his eyes seemed to promise a shallow grave for anyone who pitied him. The air in the dragon's estate didn't circulate. It lingered, heavy with the scent of floor wax and expensive, unlit tobacco. To the outside world, the sprawling fortress on the outskirts of Seoul was a monument to the absolute power of Fang Suyong. But to those within its walls, it was a pressure cooker of unspoken threats. The Dragon of Seoul had always been a man of few words, preferring the sudden, sharp violence of his lieutenants to do his talking. Now that he was bound to a chair, his silence had become a physical weight, a gravitational pull that sucked the air out of every room he entered. Suyong sat by the floor-to-ceiling window of his private study, his silhouette framed by the cold, gray light of a Korean autumn. His hands, once capable of snapping a man's wrist with a casual twist, lay perfectly still on the armrests of his wheelchair. He didn't fidget. He didn't sigh. He simply stared at the manicured garden outside with an intensity that made the veteran guards in the hallway break into a cold sweat. To look into Suyong's eyes was to look into a mirror reflecting your own deepest fears. This was why the 4-hour nurses had become a grim joke among the household staff. The staffing agencies had long since stopped sending their best. Now they sent the desperate. There was the retired military medic who walked in at 8 a.m., boasting of his nerves of steel, only to be found trembling in the driveway by noon, claiming the boss's eyes felt like a loaded gun pressed against his forehead. Then there was the high-priced specialist from Switzerland who lasted until lunch. She had tried to adjust Suyong's posture, touching his shoulder with a professional, clinical softness. Suyong hadn't moved a muscle, but the low, guttural growl that vibrated from his chest, a sound more animal than human, had sent her packing her bags before the soup was even served. The problem wasn't that he was a difficult patient. It was that he refused to be a patient at all. To Suyong, every pill offered was a sign of surrender, and every spoon of broth was a humiliation he couldn't stomach. He had built an empire on the foundation of being the strongest, the fastest, and the most ruthless. To be handled, tilted, and fed was a fate worse than the assassination attempt that had severed his spine. The estate had become a museum of his former glory, preserved in ice. The guards spoke in whispers, the kitchen staff moved on tiptoe, and the very walls seemed to hold their breath. The dragon's silence was a message to his rivals and his own men. I am still the monster you feared. I am still the predator in the tall grass. But as the days stretched into weeks of isolation, the legend of his fury began to rot into a narrative of abandonment. His lieutenants were growing restless, and the silence that had once protected him was beginning to feel like a shroud. He was a king without a voice, a dragon without fire, waiting for the end in a dark suit that felt more like a burial shroud every day. He didn't know that the stillness of his tomb was about to be shattered, not by a rival's bullet, but by the smallest, most unauthorized sound in the world. While the dragon sat in his frozen tower, Shella Oliver was fighting a different kind of war, a war of minutes, sense, and desperation. Her alarm had shrieked at 4:15 a.m., but the phone call that followed 10 minutes later was the sound that truly chilled her blood. Her cousin's voice, thick with sleep and excuses, informed her that the child care they'd agreed upon was off. No explanation, just a click and a dial tone that sounded like an eviction notice. Shella stood in her cramped kitchen, her hands trembling as she looked at Donna. Her daughter was still in her pajamas, clutching a stuffed rabbit, her dark, tight curls a halo of morning chaos. In any other job, a sick day or a late start was a hurdle. At the Fong estate, it was a death sentence for her employment. Soo-young didn't believe in human error, and he certainly didn't believe in the complications of single motherhood. To be late was to be invisible. To be absent was to be replaced. With a heart hammered thin by anxiety, Shella did the only thing a mother with no safety net could do. She bundled Donna into the car, whispering prayers into the cold morning air. By the time they reached the towering iron gates of the estate, she had fashioned a plan born of pure adrenaline. The guards at the perimeter barely glanced at the back seat, their eyes trained for assassins, not toddlers hidden under a pile of industrial-grade cleaning cloths. Shella's breath hitched as she swiped her badge, the heavy service entrance door wheezing open to reveal the sterile, subterranean world of the mansion's utility wing. She led Donna toward the laundry room, a place that smelled of bleach and steam, far removed from the cold marble of the upper floors. It was a labyrinth of humming dryers and towering shelves of white linens, the only place where a child might vanish into the background noise of the house. Shella knelt, taking Donna's small, warm face in her hands. The contrast was startling. Shella's eyes were wide with a terror she couldn't hide, while Donna's big, dark eyes were filled with nothing but curiosity. "Donna, listen to Mommy," Shella whispered, her voice cracking. "This is a game. The quiet game. It's the most important game we've ever played. You stay here behind these towels. You don't run. You don't sing. And most of all," she paused, the image of Soo-young's cold, predatory gaze flashing through her mind. "You do not make a sound, not a peep. If the big men in the suits hear you, the game is over. Do you understand?" Donna nodded solemnly, her thumb finding its way to her mouth, a habit she only reverted to when the world felt too large. Shella tucked her into a nest of warm, freshly dried towels, leaving her with a small bag of crackers and a picture book. As Shella stood and smoothed her uniform, she felt like she was leaving her heart in a lion's den. She turned the light low, the rhythmic thump-thump of the industrial washing machines providing a heartbeat for the room. She closed the door, the click of the latch sounding like a final warning. She had a mountain of marble to scrub and a dragon to avoid, and for the first time in her life, the silence of the Fong estate didn't feel like a burden. It felt like the only thing keeping her daughter alive. The quiet game was a difficult concept for a girl whose entire world was composed of questions. For a while, Donna sat in her nest of towels, watching the dust motes dance in the fluorescent hum of the laundry room. But children have a different sense of gravity. They are pulled toward the things adults spend their lives trying to avoid. To Donna, the heavy, airless silence of the upper floors didn't feel like a warning. It smelled like the way her mother looked when she cried. A thick, gray saltiness that Donna had come to associate with sadness. She didn't mean to break the rules. She simply followed the scent. She slipped out of the laundry room, her small feet silent on the cold stone. She was a spark of impossible color in the gloom, her bright yellow dress fluttering like a stray petal caught in a draft. She moved past the kitchen where Mrs. Patton was focused on a simmering pot, and drifted down the long, shadowed hallway of the east wing. The guards were at their posts, but they were trained to look for shadows at eye level, not a 4-year-old moving with the fluid, accidental grace of a kitten. She reached the mahogany doors of the study. They were heavy, but the latch hadn't caught. With a soft, determined shove, Donna pushed her way into the dragon's lair. Fong Soo-young did not turn. He sat by the window, his profile as sharp and unyielding as a blade. He was wrapped in the expensive armor of his black suit, his jaw set in a line of permanent defiance. He was a man who had commanded armies and ordered executions, but in that moment, he was just a statue in a wheelchair, staring at a world he could no longer touch. Donna didn't hesitate. She didn't know about the blacklist or the 4-hour nurses. She didn't see the feared head of the Busan Syndicate. She saw a man in a very cool, very shiny chair. She walked right up to the side of the wheelchair, the wheels catching her reflection in their polished chrome. Soo-young's eyes flickered. It was the first time in months he had been startled. He looked down, his gaze landing on the small, brown child in the vivid yellow dress. For a moment the dragon was speechless. His breath hitched, a tiny fracture in his mask of ice. Dona tilted her head, her dark curls bouncing. She looked at his still hands, then up at his face, which looked like it was made of stone. "Is it a car?" she whispered, her voice a bell-like chime in the tomb-like room. "The chair. Does it go fast?" Soo-young's throat moved. He wanted to growl, to summon the guards, to banish this impossible intruder. But the words died in his throat. He was looking at a person who wasn't afraid of him. It was a sensation so foreign it felt like a physical blow. Dona reached into the small pocket of her dress and pulled out a half-eaten oatmeal cookie, slightly crumbled and warm from her palm. She held it out to him, her expression one of immense, serious generosity. "You look hungry," she said, her big eyes fixed on his. "And sad. Cookies make the sad go away." Soo-young stared at the offering. He looked at the tiny, sticky hand and the broken cookie. In the silence of the room, something deep inside the dragon's chest, something he had buried under billions of dollars and a mountain of pride, began to ache. He didn't take the cookie, but for the first time in 2 years he didn't look away. The study was caught in a stalemate of worlds. Soo-young looked at the small, crumb-dusted offering in Dona's palm and then at the untouched tray on his desk, a bowl of expensive abalone porridge that had grown a skin of cold neglect. He had spent the morning imagining how he would punish the next person who dared to pity him. He had prepared a verbal venom that would blister the skin of any professional nurse. But he had no weapons against a 4-year-old who didn't know what a syndicate was. Dona seemed to sense the impasse. She didn't retreat from his silence. She simply pivoted. "Mommy says if you don't eat, you can't grow big and strong," she informed him, her tone echoing Shella's maternal authority. She reached for the silver spoon on the tray, her small fingers wrapping around the heavy handle with focused intent. Soo-young's jaw tightened. This was the ultimate humiliation, the moment he had fought with snarls and cold glares for months. He was the Dragon of Soul, a man whose name made grown men tremble, and he was being cornered by a girl in a yellow dress. He wanted to turn his head away, to maintain the dignity of his hunger strike, but Dona was already in his personal space. She didn't smell like the sterile, medicinal scent of the nurses. She smelled like vanilla hair oil and the warm, honest dust of the laundry room. "Open up," she commanded, her eyes wide with the gravity of her mission. She lifted the spoon, but instead of the clinical approach of a caregiver, she made a low, whistling sound through her teeth. "Vroom vroom. It's an airplane, Mr. King. It needs to land in the cave." The absurdity of the moment hit Soo-young like a physical weight. If his lieutenants walked in now, his reputation would be ash. He looked at the spoon, then at Dona's face, so earnest, so utterly convinced that her game was the most important thing in the world. He saw the way she held her own breath, her tongue poking out slightly in concentration as she balanced the porridge. For 2 years, Soo-young had been a man of stone, guarding a fortress of pride that had become his own prison. He had equate acceptance of help with the loss of his soul. But as the airplane hovered near his lips, the ridiculous, whistling sound Dona was making cracked the ice. It wasn't pity he saw in her eyes. It was a pure, uncomplicated desire to see him fed. His jaw, which had been locked in a permanent grimace of defiance, slowly, painfully relaxed. It was a surrender more profound than any he had ever made on the battlefield. He opened his mouth. The porridge was cold, but as the first bite landed, Soo-young felt a surge of something long forgotten, warmth, not from the food but from the connection. Dona beamed, her whole face lighting up as if she had just won a war. "Yay! The plane landed!" she cheered, dipping the spoon back into the bowl for a second flight. Soo-young swallowed, his throat moving with a thick, heavy effort. He didn't speak, but as Dona prepared the next takeoff, the terrifying Dragon of Soul felt a single, hot tear prick at the corner of his eye. He didn't wipe it away. He just waited for the plane to land again, his pride finally lying in pieces on the polished marble floor. The warmth of the study was a lie that vanished the moment Shella stepped through the door. She had been frantic, searching every corridor of the East Wing for the yellow dress that had slipped through her fingers. But the scene she found stopped the air in her lungs. There was Dona, perched on the edge of the dragon's desk, giggling as she guided a silver spoon toward the mouth of the most dangerous man in South Korea. Soo-young didn't look like a monster. He looked like a man who had forgotten how to breathe and was just now relearning. But as Shella rushed forward to scoop Dona into her arms, her hip caught the edge of a heavy lacquer cabinet. The impact jarred a hidden latch, and a drawer slid open with a smooth, mechanical hiss. Inside, resting on velvet the color of dried blood, was not a collection of pens or business cards. It was a pair of custom-made semi-automatic pistols, their grips worn smooth by use, lying next to a ceremonial dagger engraved with the crest of the Busan Syndicate. Beside them lay a series of grainy surveillance photos of men Shella recognized from the evening news. Men who had disappeared, men who had been found in the harbor, men who had crossed the dragon. The realization hit Shella like a physical blow, turning her blood to ice. This wasn't just a difficult billionaire in a shiny chair. This was the architect of the city's nightmares. The accidents and disappearances she had heard about in whispers at the market weren't stories. They were his curriculum vitae. She was standing in a room with a predator who had spent a decade perfecting the art of the end. Dona, we're leaving. Now, Shella gasped, her voice thin and jagged. She gripped her daughter so tightly the girl let out a small whimper of protest. Shella backed toward the door, her eyes fixed on the weapons and then on Soo-young, expecting him to snap, to roar, to summon the men in black suits to silence the woman who had seen too much. Soo-young's expression shifted. The softness Dona had coaxed out of him vanished, replaced by a raw, hollow desperation. He didn't reach for the drawer. He didn't look at the guns. He looked at the empty space where Dona had been sitting, then up at Shella. Wait, he said. The word wasn't a command. It lacked the iron authority that had defined his life. It was a rasp, a broken sound that seemed to cost him every ounce of his remaining strength. Shella hit the doorframe, her hand fumbling for the handle. I didn't see anything. We're going. We'll never come back. Please. The word stopped her. In the history of the syndicate, no one had ever heard Fang Soo-young say please. He leaned forward in his chair, his hands trembling against his lap, the tailored suit suddenly looking too big for a man so haunted. The house? It was dead before she walked in, he whispered, his eyes glassing over with a vulnerability that was more terrifying than his rage. The nurses, the guards, they look at me and see a corpse or a king. She is the only one who looks at me and sees a man. He took a jagged breath, his gaze moving to Dona, who was watching him with wide, confused eyes. Don't take the light away. Not yet. I am not that man anymore. I have no legs to run after you, Shella. I have no heart left to hurt you. Just let her stay for the hour. Please. Shella looked from the cold steel in the drawer to the broken man in the chair. The dragon wasn't asking for her silence. He was begging for his life. And for the first time, Shella realized that the most dangerous man in Seoul was the one who had nothing left to lose but the company of a child in a yellow dress. The week that followed was a delicate dance of shadows and light. Shella remained, driven by a mixture of financial necessity and a strange, burgeoning pity for the man who lived in the marble tower. She kept Dona close, but the boundaries of the quiet game had permanently dissolved. The dragon's study was no longer a tomb. It had become a makeshift playroom where the scent of expensive ink mingled with the smell of apple slices and wax crayons. On a Tuesday morning, the air in the estate shifted back to its old, razor-edged tension. 3 black sedans pulled up the long driveway, their engines purring like predators. Soo-young's captains, men with scarred knuckles and eyes like obsidian, had arrived for the monthly council. These were the architects of the syndicate's brutality, men who respected only strength and smelled blood in Soo-young's prolonged absence from the streets. Soo-young sat at his desk, his black suit pressed to a razor's edge, his expression reverting to the impenetrable mask of the dragon. He felt the old coldness creeping back into his bones, the need to project a lethal, unyielding power. But as he prepared to summon the guards to escort Dona to the laundry room, the girl scrambled up the side of his wheelchair. Wait, Mr. King, she whispered, her brow furrowed in concentration. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a sheet of stickers she'd found in Shella's bag. Bright, glittery stars and cartoonish, smiling sunflowers. With a proprietary nod, she peeled off a particularly vibrant sunflower and pressed it firmly onto the lapel of Soo-young's $5,000 jacket, right above his heart. "It's a shield," she told him, patting the sticker with her small palm, "so the bad thoughts don't get in." Soo-young looked down at the neon yellow flower clashing violently with his somber attire. He reached up, his fingers hovering over the adhesive. A week ago, he would have burned the garment. But he looked at Dona's expectant face, then at the heavy doors where his captains waited, men who thrived on fear and calculated cruelty. "Leave it," he commanded the guard, who moved forward to remove the defacement. The doors swung open. The three captains filed in, their presence bringing a chill that usually silenced the room. They sat across from Soo-young, their eyes scanning his paralyzed form, looking for the flicker of weakness that would justify a coup. Their gaze eventually landed on the lapel. The silence was deafening. One captain, a man known for his hair-trigger temper, let a smirk ghost across his lips. "Soo-young," the captain began, his voice laced with a subtle, new insolence. "We heard you were changing. But a flower? Have you traded your teeth for a garden?" Soo-young didn't flinch. He didn't look at the sticker. He leaned forward, the movement slow and predatory, his gaze locking onto the man's eyes with a cold, terrifying clarity that had been missing for 2 years. "I have traded nothing," Soo-young said, his voice a low, vibrating rasp that seemed to rattle the glassware on the table. "I have simply realized that a man who fears a sticker on my coat is a man too weak to understand true power. I am still the man who built this city, and if you mistake my mercy for a lack of teeth, I will be happy to show you how little I need my legs to tear the throat out of this syndicate." The smirk vanished. The captains instinctively sat straighter, the familiar weight of Soo-young's authority slamming back into them with twice the force. They realized then that the dragon wasn't dying. He was evolving. He was wearing a child's mark of affection as a badge of absolute, untouchable confidence. He wasn't hiding his vulnerability anymore, he was weaponizing it. As the meeting continued, the neon sunflower remained, a bright, defiant spark of humanity pinned to the chest of the most dangerous man in the room. The piece of the estate was a fragile glass ornament, and it shattered on a Thursday evening when the sun was nothing more than a bruised streak of purple against the horizon. The vulnerability of the dragon had been gossiped about in the backrooms of illegal dens and harbor bars, but the rumors had shifted. The underworld no longer whispered about a paralyzed king. They whispered about the child who held his heart. To men who viewed mercy as a commodity, Dona wasn't a guest. She was a ransom note waiting to be written. The breach didn't come with the thunder of explosives. It was a surgical strike, executed by a rival faction from the north that had spent weeks mapping the estate's blind spots. They chose the hour when the shifts changed, a 4-minute window of transition that Shella usually used to pack Dona's toys in the laundry room. Soo-young was in his study, the rhythmic clicking of his keyboard the only sound in the room, when the security feed on his secondary monitor flickered and died. His blood turned to liquid mercury. He didn't check the other cameras, he didn't call the guards. He knew. He spun his chair toward the door just as a muffled scream, short, sharp, and cut off by a heavy hand, vibrated through the vents. It was Shella. "Dona!" he roared, the sound tearing from his lungs with a raw power that hadn't been heard since the accident. He slammed his hands against the wheels of his chair, racing into the hallway. He reached the landing of the service stairs just in time to see 2 men in charcoal tactical gear disappearing through the garden exit. One held a struggling, terrified Shella, while the other, a man with a jagged scar running through his eyebrow, carried a small, thrashing bundle in a bright yellow dress. Dona's stuffed rabbit lay abandoned on the marble floor, its cotton ear trampled by a muddy boot. The guards were coming. He could hear their boots pounding from the west wing, but they were too far. The kidnappers were 20 yards from the armored SUV idling at the gate. Soo-young reached the top of the ramp he had loathed for 2 years, his heart hammering against the sunflower sticker still pinned to his lapel. "Stop!" Soo-young's voice echoed across the courtyard, freezing the men for a fraction of a second. The man holding Dona turned, a cruel, jagged smile stretching across his face. He didn't raise a gun. He simply held Dona over the edge of the stone fountain, her small feet dangling over the freezing water. "The great dragon," the rival sneered, looking at the man in the wheelchair. "We didn't come for your territory, Suyong. We came for your soul. It's amazing how small it is." Dona's eyes found Suyong's. She wasn't crying anymore. She was trembling, her face pale. But when she saw him, she reached out one small hand. "Ash!" she cried, using the name she'd given him in her own secret language. "The bad thoughts are in. Ash, help!" Suyong gripped the armrests of his chair so hard the leather groaned. He was the man who had controlled the fate of thousands, yet he was chained to a seat of chrome and rubber while his world was being stolen. The impotence was a physical fire, a burning agony that transcended his severed nerves. He looked at the child, the yellow dress a bright, screaming target against the gray stone, and felt the darkness of his past collide with the light of his present. The rival gang hadn't realized that by targeting the girl, they hadn't found his weakness. They had woken the one thing more dangerous than a mafia boss. A father with nothing left to lose. The silence that followed Dona's cry was not the hollow quiet of the tomb. It was the pressurized stillness of a predator calculating the physics of a kill. Suyong did not reach for the weapons in his study. He did not signal his guards to open fire. He knew that in a flurry of lead, the yellow dress would be the first thing to turn red. Instead, he let go of the wheels of his chair and leaned back, his face transforming into a mask of such terrifying, clinical detachment that even the man with the scarred eyebrow faltered. "You think you've found my soul," Suyong said, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried further than a shout. "But you've only found your own grave. Look at the SUV." The rival looked instinctively toward the idling vehicle. At that exact moment, the headlights flickered twice and died. From the shadows of the estate's perimeter, four silent figures emerged. Not Suyong's guards, but his elite tech ops team. They didn't hold guns. They held tablets. "I didn't just build this estate to be a fortress of stone," Suyong continued, his eyes locked on the man holding Dona. "It is a network. Your bank accounts in Macau? Drained 40 seconds ago. Your mother's estate in Jeju? Under a foreclosure filing as we speak. And that SUV you're planning to escape in? The doors are magnetically deadlocked, and the fuel line has been remotely severed. You aren't leaving. You're just standing in a very expensive cage." The man with the scar tightened his grip on Dona, his eyes darting frantically. "You're bluffing. You'd never risk her." Suyong's laugh was a dry, haunting sound. "I am the only one in this courtyard who is safe. My men have already uploaded the GPS coordinates of your entire family to every syndicate captain from here to Seoul. If a single hair on that girl's head is harmed, your bloodline ends tonight. Not by a bullet, which is a mercy, but by the total erasure of everything you have ever touched. I don't need to walk to destroy you. I only need to think." The psychological weight of Suyong's reputation slammed into the kidnappers. They weren't fighting a paralyzed man. They were fighting a ghost in the machine, a god of the underworld who could unmake their lives with a keystroke. The man holding Shella let her go, his hands beginning to shake. The man holding Dona looked at the fountain, then at Suyong's unblinking, predatory gaze. In the dragon's eyes, he didn't see a victim. He saw the cold, infinite void of a man who had mastered the art of the win-loss ratio. "Set her down," Suyong commanded. The kidnapper's bravado collapsed. He didn't drop her. He placed Dona onto the stone path as if she were made of thin glass. He backed away, hands raised, his face a map of pure, unadulterated terror. He realized too late that Suyong hadn't become weak. He had become efficient. Dona didn't wait. She sprinted across the courtyard, her yellow dress a blur of light against the darkness. Shella met her halfway, collapsing into a sob as she pulled her daughter into her chest. But Dona pulled away, running straight to the wheelchair. She threw her small arms around Suyong's neck, burying her face in the lapel of his suit. Suyong's hands, the ones that had just dismantled a criminal faction without spilling a drop of blood, finally shook. He didn't look at the retreating rivals or the guards who were now moving in to finish the cleanup. He only looked at the curly hair pressed against his chest. He reached up, his fingers gently stroking the yellow fabric, proving to the world that his mind was a weapon, but his heart, finally, was a shield. The transition was not marked by a grand proclamation, but by a series of quiet, domestic rebellions. The Italian marble floors, once polished to a treacherous mirror shine, now bore the faint, chalky footprints of a child's hopscotch game. The heavy, airless silence that had defined the estate for 2 years had been permanently evicted, replaced by the clatter of plastic tea sets and the occasional, exuberant bark of a golden retriever Donna had insisted Soo-young needed for protection. The dragon's study, once the nerve center of a criminal empire, had undergone the most radical transformation. The custom-made semi-automatic pistols were gone, replaced in their velvet-lined drawer by a collection of particularly smooth riverstones and a half-eaten box of crayons. The high-security monitors still hummed, but they no longer tracked rival movements. They were now primarily used to monitor the progress of the rose bushes in the garden and to ensure that Shella wasn't working too hard in the kitchen. Shella no longer ducked her head when she passed Soo-young in the hallway. She walked with the quiet confidence of a woman who knew she was the pillar holding the roof up. She had traded her maid's uniform for clothes that allowed her to breathe, and her laughter was now a frequent guest in the dining room. On a warm Saturday afternoon, the light in the garden was honey-thick and golden. Soo-young sat in his wheelchair near the stone fountain, but he was no longer staring at the horizon with the eyes of a prisoner. He was wearing a dark linen shirt, the sleeves rolled up, and on his lapel sat a fresh, neon-pink butterfly sticker, his badge of office for the day. Donna stood before him, her yellow dress slightly stained with grass, her expression one of immense professional gravity. She had arranged a circle of mismatched porcelain cups on a low wooden table. "Mr. King," she said, tapping a tiny spoon against a saucer, "I have a big job opening. We need a dragon for the royal tea party. Pays 3 cookies and a hug. Do you want to be hired?" Soo-young looked at the tiny girl, his gaze softening in a way that would have been unrecognizable to the captains who had once sat at his table. He thought of the billions he had made, the territory he had conquered, and the blood he had spilled to keep it. It all felt like a fever dream from a life he had outgrown. He looked at Shella, who was watching them from the porch with a soft, knowing smile, and then back at the toddler waiting for his answer. "The cookies must be oatmeal," Soo-young said, his voice no longer a rasping growl, but a warm, steady baritone. "Deal," Donna chirped, pouring a generous amount of imaginary tea into his cup. "Now you have to roar, but a nice roar, a tea party roar." And then it happened. It started as a low vibration in his chest, a sound that hadn't found its way out in a decade. It bubbled up, breaking through the last of the ice, until Fong Soo-young, the man who had terrified a city, threw his head back and laughed. It was a bright, genuine sound that echoed off the stone walls and rose into the summer air, carrying with it the weight of his old life. He wasn't the dragon of soul anymore. He was a man at a tea party finally home. The transformation of the Fong estate proves that the most impenetrable fortresses are not made of stone and steel, but of unhealed grief and isolated pride. Soo-young had spent a lifetime believing that power was a shield meant to keep the world out, only to find that it had become his prison. It took the fearless innocence of a child in a yellow dress to demonstrate that true strength is not found in the ability to command, but in the courage to be vulnerable. We often build walls to protect our wounds, forgetting that those same walls block the light required for them to heal. This story serves as a reminder that no soul is ever truly lost, and no heart is too broken to be mended, provided we are willing to let go of our laminated rules and accept the simple, transformative grace of a helping hand. Do you believe the soul is never truly lost? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Do not forget to like this video and subscribe to the Cinem Corner channel. Thanks for watching. Sit back, relax, and let me tell you another story.